Oh, also, does Dale have, is Dale able to share his PowerPoint?
Yeah, I'm gonna bump him up and sure people come. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I have Dale Matusevich and George Tilson, and they are going to share an overview of indicators 1, 2, 13, and 14. This session will focus on areas related to school-age children, such as the number of students with disabilities graduating from high school with a regular diploma, the number of students with disabilities dropping out of school, the percent of students with measurable post-secondary goals, the number of students with disabilities who are enrolled in higher education, competitive employment, training programs, or other employment within 1 year after high school. So good morning or good afternoon, guys. I'm going to turn it over to you.
All righty, great. Thanks, Mary.
You're welcome.
So let's see, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Hopefully this works better for me than it did the other day.
You're up.
Yep.
All right. All right, great. So here we go. So again, I think there's just a few people on. So as we're going through this presentation, feel free to kind of unmute or in the chat, ask your questions as we go along. We do have a couple of spots where we will be asking questions as well. But as we go through this, we want to not only have this as kind of an indicator discussion, but more so over a whole transition perspective and how can we in Delaware improve our transition process for our students with disabilities to ensure that they are positively engaged once they leave secondary education. So I do have my trusty sidekick here, Dr. George Tilson, who has worked with us for many years in the state of Delaware around transition services. So he may interject and he's going to help assist me in taking notes as we go through with any discussions that we have. So we make sure that we have everybody's information and feedback as we move through this. But again, it's really looking at, before we even jump in, is really looking at, we are doing this for one of our state's systemic or state performance plan that we have to submit to the feds. This is a new package for us. So we're kind of looking at these 4 areas over the next 5 years, looking at what our current data is, what some historical data is, but also looking at setting new targets, looking at what's potentially or what is working for us now, but what could potentially we help try to implement across our state and all of our districts and charters to help improve each of these 4 areas as we go through. But as Mary mentioned, we're going to be talking about graduation rates, dropout rates, transition planning in the IEP, and then what our data looks like for our students after they exit secondary education. And we collect that data 1 year after students are leaving. So kind of just jumping in, looking at it from a graduation perspective, this is a new methodology for us for collecting graduation rates through this new package. Before we had aligned with our Every Student Succeeds Act plan that the state had approved by U.S. Department of Education. Now we are looking at this for the Office of Special Ed Programming, so OSEP, and they're using a different perspective for us for our LEA determinations and what we will use for our LEA determinations or local education agency determinations each year as we're moving through. So we're moving away from the ESSA calculation, which was a strict 4-year cohort. So once you entered into high school, we had to graduate students in 4 years. Now that for our school accountability piece under the Every Student Succeeds Act will stay in place, but for our report into the Office of Special Ed Programming, we are only looking at students who exit during a specific year. So if we look at this, we always use lag data just because of the planning purposes and when the data is available to us. So I'm going to just click to the next slide because this kind of gives us the calculation in layman's terms, if you will. So we're looking at, again, a specific year, and this year's reporting will be from the 1920 school year. We're still calculating the 2021 data. So it's not even into the feds yet, so we have to use lag data. So we're looking at our numerator is our youth with disabilities who exit high school with a regular diploma. And our denominator in this calculation, there are all youth with IEPs who exit high school with either a regular diploma, alternate diploma, who are aging out or dropping out. So in our denominator, we look at all of the students that leave during that one particular year. And our numerator is those that exit with a regular high school diploma. As we look at our historical data, as we go through, if you'll notice, the bottom row is our targets that we've set previously. You will notice that we did change calculations because we weren't in line with the Every Student Succeeds Act during the fiscal years prior to 2018. So we had to go in and work with stakeholder groups during that time to be able to look at targets based on the ESSA calculation and what that was looking like for our data now. So as you're looking at this data, the third line from the bottom is those are the actual numbers using this new calculation. So we're solely looking at the new calculation. We're not looking at the old calculation at all. So if you see, we kind of rode the wave here, if you will, and going, in fiscal year 2013, we were at just over 82%. Then we crept up to just over 83%. And then we kind of rode that roller coaster, if you will. But over the last 3 years, our numbers have continued to increase, even though they have kind of increased kind of minimally. You can see we have been meeting our targets to date, though. So as we continue to look at this, we're going to ask questions in a few minutes to try to look at, what's working, what could we do better to improve graduation rates. But we wanted to save those questions and go through all the indicators first because they all interconnect with each other. So what we do for one will have impact on the other 3 indicators as well. So I'm just going to cruise through these and then we can hopefully have some conversation. Our dropout measurement has also is changing. For some, when they see the new numbers, kind of jaws might hit the floor because it does look like our dropout rate increases by almost 10%. But I want to talk through that a little bit. And looking at that, this is kind of the specific information for the calculation change. Previously, we had been using an event methodology, which we took our denominator in our calculation was our number of students who showed up in our September 30th count, or our unit count numbers that we pull after September 30th. And our denominator were the number of dropouts. So looking at any kid that we felt should be coming back for that particular year that didn't show back up were counted as dropouts. So we wanted to really look at, for us, that calculation showed us at about 2% or just over 2%. But our new calculation, again, it's the same as the graduation formula, if you will. So we're only looking at one particular year. In the event methodology, our denominator was about 6,500 to 7,000 students, because we looked at all the students that were still with us, ages 14 to 21, where now we're only looking, our denominator is looking only at the number of students who left during that year. So again, our denominator stays the same for this. It's all students with IEPs ages 14 to 21 who have exited school with a regular or an alternate diploma, who aged out or dropped out. And then our numerator, or our top number, is those students who dropped out. And those are basically the students we can't figure out where they went, and we couldn't make a determination on, did they transfer to another school? Did they transfer to another school out of state? If those were counted and we could figure out where those students went, they were not counted as dropouts. So again, you look at the data here, our bottom row was set. Again, we kind of looked and reset targets at this point too, as we were going down. Our third row here is the calculation using this new methodology. As I said, with the event methodology, we were down to about 2.3% in our reporting last year, but our baseline moving in for this reporting is going to be 11.7%. So our denominator in this calculation went from about 6,500 to 7,000 down to about 12 to 1,300. So the N size has dropped quite a bit, again, because we're only looking at students who left during that year to determine this calculation. So moving on, we will come back and look at the data a little bit in just a moment. We're looking at indicator 13. This is looking at transition planning in the IEP. So we're looking at the specific portions or pieces that should be in the transition plan or the IEP. So we're looking at, do they have appropriate measurable post-secondary goals? Are they updated annually? Were they based on age-appropriate transition assessments? So is there a connection there? We're also looking at the transition services and activities, which that includes courses of study, but then also if you're familiar with the IEP, which I hope you are, the boxes below are our services and activities, and those should connect to our post-school goals. So we're looking for that connection. Do those activities and services reasonably enable that student to meet those post-secondary goals? Then we're also looking, was there a need to invite an outside agency, as well as was the student invited to the meeting as well, because the student should be invited to any IEP where we're talking about transition planning. So for us, we do use, for the federal reporting, we're a little bit more stringent here because of our state regulations. In the federal guidelines, you only have to report for ages 16 and above, but because of our state regulations, we report for any student that is 14 and above or in the 8th grade, because that's when our state regulations say that we should have transition planning in the IEP. So we look at everybody that should have that in their IEP here in Delaware. And that's what we report on. So as you see in the data, again, I will go ahead and mention there is no target line here because this is a compliance indicator where the other three are results oriented. The compliance indicators for indicator 13, it has to be at 100%. So there's no need to set the target. The target is already set for us. But as you can see, we are doing quite well actually with transition planning in having the correct components within the IEP. You can see in fiscal year 2013, we were down under 50%. That's when we put in a new process for evaluating and assessing those transition IEPs, and we could put a self-assessment component in where we are looking at every single IEP for anyone that's transition age 14 and above or in the 8th grade. So our numbers, you can see, are well representative of what our state is. As you can see, those numbers have continued to increase over the years. We're in fiscal year 2019, we reviewed as a state over 9,000 IEPs. We validate the self-assessment information, so we just don't take what the LEAs are telling us, the percentage they're at. So we validate between 15 and 18% of those each year here at the Department of Education to look at. So we are doing pretty good here as far as the compliance piece. Moving into indicator 14, we have 3 different data points that we look at. So one of those is higher education. Our students in a 2 or 4 year college or university, they've completed 1 year upon leaving secondary education. Our second metric is taking the higher ed numbers and adding them to the students who are competitively integrated employed within 1 year of leaving high school. We do not double count. So if one student, we may have students who are in higher ed and also working in a competitive employment situation, but they're only counted in the higher ed. We're not double counting. We're individually counting or single counting. And then category 3 is kind of our catch-all area, where they're enrolled in higher ed, some other type of post-secondary ed training. So anything outside of a 2 or a 4 year college or university. So like adult education, credentialing programs, technical or trade schools, and then also catching the competitively integrated employed as well as some other employment. So looking at, and I'm going to talk about these definitions as we move forward through the data. So looking at the data here, this is for measure A, which is students enrolled once they leave. Again, our response rate for this, because typically leaving in 1 year or a particular year, we have between 12 and 1,300 each year. So we only look at the response rate. So that's where our percentages are taken into account. So if you're looking at fiscal year 2019, you're looking at, we had 674 responses. Our response rate was right at 53%, give or take a few tenths of a point one way or the other. But we had 360 of those students were involved or enrolled in higher ed. So that was a 53% of those that responded. And you can see where, we can see where our targets have been at a 4% increase each year. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So looking at measure B, again, we're adding in those who are competitively integrated employed. So for us, that means they're working at least 20 hours a week. That's at or above minimum wage. And we look at it, even though the feds say for at least 90 days in one particular year, we do not count them in this category unless they have been employed for at least 90 consecutive days. We kind of use the federal vocational rehabilitation definition for this, because we feel that if a student has 5 different jobs over the course of the year, and that adds up to 90 days, that's not really a particularly a positive success or engagement, because they jumped so many jobs within that time frame. So we look at the consistency within this. You can see we were just under our target here. So that we added about 135 students to this count for this measure. So that jumped us up to having 73% positively engaged. Looking at measure C, we are looking at, again, it's kind of that catch-all area. So we're looking at, this encompasses those that may not be working 20 hours a week. It could be looking at those that are in some type of other training programs, trade schools. We look at the day programs that folks are in and what services they're getting through those day programs. And here, again, we jumped up, we added about another 100 students. That took us to 88% of the 674 who we were able to contact. So we were at 88% there. As we talk about targets later, I'll mention here, my personal philosophy is this target we keep at 100%. just because my philosophy is I can't put out that I don't want 100% of our students positively engaged in the community after they leave secondary education. But I'm up for conversation about that. And we've had some of that in some of our other stakeholder groups. So looking at that, we just want to kind of open the floor up. You can do it in the chat. You can unmute. I'm not sure how many folks we have on the call or in the meeting, but we're looking at kind of getting some feedback about what strategies you think our LEAs are incorporating, or strategies that we have coming out of the Department of Education that may be working, or things that we could do from the Department of Ed to help improve those graduation rates. So we will take any type of comments at this point in time.
I had a question. Is there, and you probably don't know the answer to this, but is there any data on how many of those students that don't return are over 18?
We could pull those numbers. That would be a different data set that we would pull. But there is a way for us to kind of break down. Are you looking at, in general, those that are eligible to return but don't return?
Yeah, because they're adults now. So
yeah, Mary, yeah, that's an interesting thing, and that's one of the things that we have talked to about or to our LEAs about, and really looked at, are they looking at coding students correctly or not? Because if we have someone that would be eligible for 18 to 21-year-old programming, so they haven't earned a regular diploma, so they would be eligible to come back. That the school feels that the plan is for them to come back. That's what they've agreed on. But then they, for whatever reason, they don't show up at the coming into the next year. To be honest, is the question I always say or throw back is, are we doing our due diligence to try to engage those students and figure out what's going on? Because we do see that some of those students, if we don't hear from them, they automatically default to a dropout in our data. But it's interesting because then that next year, they typically show up in our post-school outcomes data to where they're either, they're into adult education now potentially, or they might be employed or something like that. So we do catch some of those through that process.
Yeah, that was my next question. I wonder, if some of those were dropouts to employment and instead of, continuing the education.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that is difficult for us to do is looking at the dropouts and getting the reasons for why kids are dropping out. Our response rate from our LEAs when they try to determine, why a kid has dropped out, typically it's a low response rate that we get. It's probably around below 20%. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But the biggest reasons are, the number one reason is typically because of financial reasons. So kids are trying to help out their families. And then the second one is typically because of the academic or lack of engagement within the educational process.
I don't see anything in the chat.
So anyone have anything about what we could be doing better? What you might feel has been working? You know, sometimes, and I know we've got, we were set for 30 minutes, right, Mary? So I think we've got about 5 minutes left, because I do want to talk about targeting, target setting, but I would throw out for those that are on, you know, some of the things we have been working on is we do meet monthly through a monthly transition cadre that we have, and we typically have actually over 100 people that attend that on a monthly basis. Anywhere from educators to state agency personnel, to family members, community service providers, anybody that has a stake in transition is invited. All they would need to do is email me and say, can I get on your list? And we'll put you on the list to receive those announcements and anything that I send out transition related. We also have one of our huge initiatives now is our pipeline to career development or career success for students with disabilities. That's a partnership between our career and tech ed STEM work group, special education or exceptional children resources here at the department, as well as vocational rehabilitation, developmental disability services, division for the visual impairments. And we're all working together to really make sure that our students have equitable access to all of our CTE programming. So we have seen some rises in our participant numbers for students with disabilities, for districts and charters who have participated in that program. So knowing that we're stretching on time.
Hey, Dale.
Yes,
Sorry
George.
to interrupt. Just wanted to mention, would you mention the Google doc that you prepared that we'll send out to everyone, that gives them another opportunity just to reflect and add comments or responses?
Yeah, thanks, George. So Mary, what we can do here as well is I can forward this PowerPoint to you as well, and feel free to post it on the PIC website. But I will also I have Google Forms for each of these data metrics that kind of ask these same questions. And if folks want to go in and fill it out, because I know this is a lot of information to gather in 30 minutes and try to provide feedback, but it will give you time to think about things. And then at your leisure, you can go back in and look at the Google Forms and provide information. Again, there'll be a link for each one as we go through.
Yeah, sure. I can post it on our website and direct people from social media who couldn't be here. Before we move on, I just wanted what is working. I think that the grooming for advocating for yourself, like teaching the students earlier how to interact or what's in their IEP and what services they have or accommodations that they have is really helping, because by the time they get to that transition age, they already know, and I think they'll be more inclined to stay on for the 18 to 21 portion to complete their high school diploma, because they know what is available to them. So I think that's the most important strategy to continue to use.
I agree with you, Mary, and I think we've got some small pockets of that across the state, but I agree that could be something and should be something that we continue to work on is embedding transition at an earlier age, but then also kind of giving that disability awareness and self-advocacy piece. So thank you for that feedback. So I'm going to move just kind of quickly to kind of looking at the target feedback. Again, looking at the graduation rate, again, this will be our baseline data at 78%. We're setting targets for the next 5 years. So as we look at this, you can see previously we were going up 1.2% per year. In previous feedback, I've gotten to anything from maybe a 0.5 percentage point to a percentage point to 2 percentage points increase per year. So, feedback on that would be greatly appreciated. Again, we don't have to give that feedback right now. You could give that feedback in the Google Forms, and we'll take that and analyze that as we move through the process as well. That way it'll give you a little bit of time to kind of think and digest numbers a little bit, because as we're setting targets, I believe we have to also understand that, we're still kind of in the middle of COVID, and what impact is that going to have on our numbers. We can't go lower than our baseline. So we want to continue to look at that and what is, a rigorous number for us to reach for, but also making sure that we're striving to be able to achieve our goals as we go through. So with that, I'll go into the dropout. Again, this is one that we're really going to have to take a good look at, because if we're at 11.7% currently, will be our baseline. And as you can see, our targets before don't even really make a lot of sense with the new calculation. So we're really going to have to look at this baseline number and kind of look at determining that with the calculation, again, keeping COVID in mind as we're setting a rigorous but attainable goal. The previous feedback I've gotten is anywhere, we were going down a 0.3% on the previous one, but I've gotten in feedback I've gotten from other stakeholder meetings that we've had is anywhere from like 0.3% and keeping it at that to 1% annually. But again, we would be starting with that 11.7 number as our baseline. Again, as we're looking at transition planning in the IEP, again, there's no need for target setting here because this is a compliance indicator. It must be 100%. So we're going to go ahead and jump to indicator 14. So we're looking at the percentage of higher ed. Our baseline data will be 53%. As you can see, we were starting at a point, or previously our targets went up by 4%, which was a really high goal for us, and we obtained that. I think we started that low because our original numbers were that low. And also previously, our response rate, how we were previously collecting data, was only about 20 to 25%. Now our response rate is up over and has been consistent for about the last 3 or 4 years at right at 50% or higher as we move through. So looking at resetting, again, our baseline would be 53%. So kind of looking at it, the numbers that we have gotten so far have been, make this like a 2% annual increase rather than the 4%. But again, we're willing to have those discussions and get your feedback. Same for measure B. Before it was a consistent 4% increase in our target. As you can see, we have met it some years, not others. This past year, we did not meet it. But I think, one, we were able to get our response rate up a little more. So that gave us an opportunity to analyze what students weren't engaged, so we could look and have conversations, not only in our cadre, but with our agency folks to see how we could improve those numbers. So again, the response that we've gotten in previous meetings has been about 2% of an increase potentially, rather than the 4% increase. But again, we are up for discussion. Then again, our catch-all category. Again, I'm up for debate on keeping this at 100% or not, or having discussions. Again, my personal philosophy is I want all of our students to be positively engaged in some activity once they leave secondary education. So I would fight hard to keep this at 100%. But again, I am willing to have conversations about that. So with that, I will ask for feedback again. You can put it in the chat. I think you can unmute, or I can allow you to talk, I believe. So Kathy or Pam, any conversation? I know we're a few minutes over the 30 minutes, but.
Well, I will tell you, Dale, I really appreciate this collaboration between DOE and PIC, because there are a lot of, there's lots of information about these indicators that I have to really dig deeper in. And I really appreciate the opportunity, that PIC and DOE are putting together to do this. I don't have comments at the moment because I'm still trying to digest all of it, and I wouldn't want to, provide kind of incorrect or invalid feedback, but I do intend to share these and to provide them to council members and, especially new council members as we, collaboratively learn and try to support our children and families. So I just really appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Pam. Yeah, I'm actually working to try to get on the transition subcommittee agenda, hopefully for this coming month. And I believe, I know Mary Ann has asked if any of us are free that evening. So I will be on to present this to the full council as well.
Wonderful, thank you.
So
Great.
Hopefully we won't make it a marathon meeting for you.
Well, and I know, with COVID and all of the stuff that is going on in the world, I'll just say stuff, it's so important now more than ever that we all get together and really try to understand the data and really try to understand how we can support DOE and, ultimately children and families and moving through this. So we really appreciate this.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around in 30 minutes.
But it's a great step. It's a great first step. So I intend to take these and add those, informational materials that you were all creating and use them as part of like a toolkit to dig down into each indicator.
Yeah, so my plan is, and I think for most of us in the office that are working around this is we all kind of have those Google forms available or some type of online survey for folks to provide feedback. So I know I'm keeping mine open at least probably through the end of November, maybe into early December, but about that time, I'm going to need to cut it off because we need to begin our writing and really putting everything together for our February 1 submission. And I've gotten some good feedback on the forms already. So I've been pleasantly surprised at the responses that folks have gone in and actually given some good feedback.
That's great. That's great news.
So, yeah, Kathy.
Hey there. So I guess wanted to just add to that the value of having something like this. And I think as PIC, when we're working with families, we might find some ways to help it be a little bit more digestible because it is pretty complicated. But I do think even if it's somewhat complicated, what is really helpful about this partnership and getting the information out is that families realize that behind the scenes, there really is a lot going on. But because I do think sometimes there is a thought that, oh, nobody cares who graduates or nobody's really keeping track of this. They always say we're doing okay, but who really knows? So I guess I just wanted to reinforce that. And again, there may be some ways that we can filter the information so that you get valuable feedback to what you're already doing, but what we might be able to simplify it a little bit more if that's even possible. So thank you both for and George for doing this.
And Kat, that's a great point. That's kind of what Midra and I have been talking about a lot when we, talk about the indicators. I mean, as professionals working in this field, it is a lot to digest. And there's 17 indicators, right? So really how to pull it apart, how to understand it as a professional, and then what do families need to know and how to pick it apart for families. So any support, any feedback you'd like to provide for us to do that, we'd welcome that as well.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we've kind of been talking about with I've been talking not only with Midra and PIC, but also with DD Council as well, and doing a couple things with Emmanuel Jenkins there is really looking at, because some of the feedback we've gotten is just as you said, parents don't really understand or know what's going on and the programs that some of the programming that we have in schools that students may or may not be taking partaking in. So I think it's working to get that word out more so families do understand what the options are out there, as well as, you know, questions to ask. So I think with that, Mary, we'll kind of turn it back over to you. I know we're about 10 minutes over from what we had planned, but Pam and Kathy, thanks for popping in and providing some input.
Yes, thank you.
Great to
Thank
see you
you
all.
both. And we will be on again tonight at 6. And I will make sure that all of this information goes up on our website. So look out for that. And then if you're interested, you can go back and fill out the Google Forms as well.
All righty.
But thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Great. Thanks,
Thank
Mary.
you.
All right. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.